make sense to everybody?
Nice, very nice.
And it
And
just,
motion to approve as corrected.
can I,
Right, oh, second.
And now, any further discussion?
No, no more discussion.
point of information, Joe?
Joe had something.
Just a point of information, I printed this off the webpage today, so, and this is the 2019-20, so it's already available as, I don't know if we're all looking at the same.
2021.
Fiscal 20,
Right, fiscal year
yeah. Great. So I guess my question is whatever, this, I'm looking at the one that's on the website, I don't know if that's the most recent, the current version that you all put together. But I would also suggest it's in PDF form, but I've had at least a couple of people outside the committee say, could it also be made available in Word, in this Word version? So allow people to fill, like download the form and fill it, as opposed to painfully reprinting it. User friendly.
The flip side to that is that they can also edit the form. And it may take a while to figure out that they aren't actually responding to the form as you wanted them to. What's the pleasure of the group?
It would seem it's our obligation to have it the same and to make it available, because I know on my computer, sometimes I can open people's programs, sometimes I can't. We have to have it available. It's our job.
It being, I'm not sure I follow that. Sure.
Are you meaning that the applicant can actually edit our form then? What our content of form is?
If you put it out in Word,
But can't you protect it?
No, not in a Word document, fillable PDF you could. That's when you can.
Oh.
You can,
You can't protect a section of the Word document,
you
but
know,
you can protect an entire Word document.
so, I don't see a problem with having it in Word. I mean, if they, you know, if they go off the reservation as far as what the copy is, I think we can pick that up, you know, as far as that goes, because we start to look at, you know, it gets a little bit
Is that
robust as far as, you know.
is that how most people feel?
As long as we have ours right.
it. I mean,
Having ours right is the key thing.
Well, we'll put it out in both PDF and Word, and if they're inclined to play rewriter, they'll know that the original is out there. Okay,
So can you add a footnote then, that if anybody alters our form documentation, that the application will be returned to the applicant? And I guarantee you, they will not alter it then.
but there may be some alterations that we actually are comfortable with, like if they start putting spaces between things or adding lines of space for their responses. I would reject
I
that.
don't think we're gonna have the issue where we're gonna have 50 applications coming in Word and we're gonna worry about that.
Yeah,
I think-
okay.
I think there may be one or two, and probably easier for us to read if they put it in Word anyways, as far as somebody's handwriting. So, just, you know, we'll try it, and if there's a problem.
Then we'll know.
We'll have to have a talking to.
Huh.
We'll
So
send
I-
Cheryl after him.
So Peter, your motion was to approve as amended.
Correct.
Yeah.
And let us also say, and to post in PDF and Word formats as part of the motion. And I see the seconder nodding, so
Yeah.
Second.
we're good for that. Anything else? If not, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? We're good to go. Things are a little more complicated on the community preservation plan. We have made a lot of the changes that we are eligible to put in. We know we have one that isn't in yet, but we also know we want to be able to post something for people to read before they come to our meeting on the 25th. So my suggestion is that a motion to have this posted as a draft would address that.
Excellent,
First,
excellent.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay? Draft, second. we are all here together, so if anybody has spotted anything in the emerging drafts, I don't expect to see any comments from Peter or me because we were in the heart of doing edits, or even if Patrick had a vote, he's been in the midst of it all. So, I'm not seeing anybody else grabbing for the microphone. So, are you, Pat and Paul, are you comfortable with our handling the document distribution in this fashion, having it posted as draft?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Then seeing no request for further discussion, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
I heard a high enough volume, I don't think I even need to ask for those opposed, so.
But you should.
All those opposed? Clean and thorough. Okay, this brings us up to the fall special town meeting. And the item under that is the St. Lot land purchase application. Paul, can you walk us through that?
Yes, good evening. Usually the special town meeting is in the beginning of November or late October. And this year it's the first week of October 7th, and will likely be October 7th and spill over to October 10th if it's not completed on the 7th. So we had to just scramble a little bit to get everything in order, and I think we're there. I'm going to start by providing a little bit of project background, history of this, and then bring us right up to a conversation this afternoon with Town Council. Most of you are aware that this property is owned by DCD Realty Trust. It was part of a special permit application, a major project special permit application before the planning board for 837 car auto storage lot. This was one of 3 parcels that were proposed for the storage lot. During the project review process, responding to overwhelming neighborhood opposition and opposition from the planning board for storing cars on this one of the 3 parcels, the applicant decided to withdraw his plans to store cars on this particular piece of land that's zoned manufacturing and at the end of 3 dead-end streets. It's a 6-acre parcel, and it got nicknamed during the permitting process as the Saint Lot because it is at the end of 3 Saint Streets in South Norwood. At the end of the permitting process, the applicant agreed to give the town an option to purchase the property. The neighborhood residents were very concerned that, okay, now that we're not going to store cars there, we still have 6 acres of developable land in the manufacturing zone abutting a residential neighborhood. And the owner and the applicant responded to that by giving us the option to purchase, subject to getting all their permits. They received their major project special permit from the planning board, and then they received orders of conditions from the Conservation Commission. And since that time, the property has been sold from the original owner, Round Pond, Bruce Commonitz, to DCD Realty Trust. And they then worked on complying with conditions of approval for the project, and they're about to start construction of the other 2 lots. You will recall we were trying to purchase this property for the annual town meeting last year, and the owners said that they wanted to get everything in lined up, get their permits in place, and they said they wanted to really kind of start construction before they sold the property. And so we had to withdraw that application, but knew that we would work on it over the summer and come back this fall with another community preservation application to purchase the property. I met with the owners, so we ordered a land appraisal last year, and it was performed by Peterson, LaChance, Regan, and Pino LLC. The appraised value of the property was $280,000. under the Community Preservation Act, communities can pay what the appraised or the assessed value is, but they can't pay more. And when I explained that to the owners, they indicated that they'd be willing to sell the property to us for $280,000, the appraised value. And they confirmed that in a meeting that I had with them last May. I worked over the summer with town council and representatives for the owners to get a purchase and sales agreement in place. And I knew that the fall town meeting would be coming, and so I started in June and kept after them to get it done. Working with town council, we now have a purchase and sales agreement signed by DCB Realty Trust. The town will not countersign that and execute the document until a town meeting vote. And that was discussed with town council Dave DeLuca this afternoon. So they've signed it. He said it doesn't make sense for the selectmen to sign it until we know we want to buy it. And so that will be hopefully later in October, after hopefully we get it approved by town meeting. In addition to that work, I knew that we needed to place a conservation restriction on the property. This is a requirement of the Community Preservation Act for any open space purchases that will be conservation land. I contacted a nonprofit environmental land trust that I had worked with in the past, and I knew that they were in the business of holding and enforcing conservation restrictions. I met with Scott McFadden from the Wildlands Trust of Southeastern Mass, and we walked the site, I think early in the spring. He followed up with an estimate for what Wildlands Trust, what their fee would be to hold the conservation restriction. And under the operation of law, the conservation restriction has to be held by a separate entity than the owner. And conservation restrictions spell out clearly what the property can be used for and what it can't be used for. And we can include things in the conservation restriction that we know we want to include on the property. And an example of this is that we've talked about building a small observation platform on the bank of the river so that people could see and smell the river and see the wildlife. And that would be something that in the conservation restriction we would spell out that a small platform, something would be constructed on the property. His cost estimate was consistent with what I thought it would be, and it's for $10,000. I also contacted the Neponset River Watershed Association and asked them if they wanted to hold the conservation restriction. And there was initial interest, and they, their board of directors discussed it and eventually said, you know, we're gonna hold off on that, and they respectfully declined that offer. I've invited Scott McFadden to come to our next meeting on the 25th to do a primer on conservation restrictions and be able to answer questions from anyone. This is the first one that will be in Norwood. I've been involved with conservation restrictions for the last 33 years, and I've seen dozens of them, reviewed them, and ran them through the approval process with having town council review them and then having them recorded. And so I'm familiar with all this, but I know that the folks in Norwood aren't. And so I thought it'd be a good idea to bring him in and have him explain what his organization does, what land they hold, and you know, 15-minute presentation, answer some questions. And so he's agreed to do that. He said, based on our site walk, that the property has high conservation value because it's bordered on two sides by streams, with House Brook and the Neponset River, and it's a high-value piece of property. The other thing that scored it high in their rating form was that it also abuts other town land, Elliott Park, and it lends itself well to create a walking trail that could loop over to Elliott Park, and then it could pop back out onto up to Washington Street, walk on Washington Street, and circle back down, potentially making like a mile-long loop. If you want to cross Washington Street, there's the Eden Endine property, And so it really will add some quality open space that would be protected forever with this conservation restriction. We went forward with drafting a warrant article, and this is where we had a little more time or advance notice of town meeting. I would have worked with you guys on the language of the article, but the deadline came up, and so what we did was Pat took a model land acquisition article from the Community Preservation Coalition's website, and we worked and reworked that. Pat did an initial draft, I reworked it a little bit. There was some language that, there was reference to well rights, and I removed that. There was reference to easements and flowage rights, and I left that in because the property does have a sewer easement, and there are 2 bodies of water, and maybe someday we want to exercise our flowage rights. But there was also language in there which allowed for the option of bonding the property. Given what the funding request is going to be, and right now the warrant has $325,000 in the funding request, I felt that it didn't really rise to the occasion of the amount to need to bond it. But that is a decision that the CPC needs to make, along with the decision of which accounts you want to take the money from and the amounts from each account. And we're going to have that discussion in a few minutes when I wrap this summary up. I have been working with David DeLuca, Town Council, on the land purchase, and he's fully engaged at this point. We're also working with Kathy County, the town's procurement officer, to make sure that we follow all of the legal requirements in terms of noticing that we're in the process of purchasing this property. Town Council said, we've talked about doing a title review, and he said that they're ready to do that, but they don't want to invest time and energy into that until they know that town meeting's going to approve it. So after the town meeting vote, he'll then run title on it. He said it'll take about a month. The language in the purchase and sales agreement states that subject to a favorable vote of town meeting, we would close on the property at a mutually agreed upon date. So that it provides some room for us to wrap up everything we need to do the land purchase. The applicant for the auto storage project had contracted for a phase 1 environmental assessment of the property. And they hired a company, I think, called Boston Environmental. They reviewed the property, they did some soil samples, they installed some monitoring wells. They did discover some contamination behind the warehouse building on the opposite side of the river, so not on this property. The exhibits in the study indicated that they did do some digging around on this particular, on the subject property. They didn't find anything, so it pretty much came up clean. We do know, however, that the property has historically been used by the Bird Shingle Factory. There, it was at one time, I know, used for a parking lot for the employees. And one of our planning board members said that his dad worked there and parked his car there. Unfortunately, when Hurricane Carol blew into town, and it totaled his car, flooding it. During a walk in the woods with the landscape architect on Monday, I saw what looked like the bridge abutment. There was a bridge from the bus lot crossing over, and I saw the concrete, what looked like the abutment for that bridge. So we know it's been used in the past. It's not a piece of virgin forest land that's never been used. But there was an environmental assessment that was passed on to town council, and that's part of any land acquisition, to make sure that you're not buying property that has any kind of hazardous waste, environmental hotspots. We will need a land survey, and I've talked to the town engineer, Mark Ryan, about this, and with David DeLuca, and this piece of property is a parcel that includes what we call the bus lot, where the school buses had been parked. That's one lot, and then across the street where the warehouse building, it's another lot that was part of this project. we're gonna have to have a survey done to mark out the piece of, the 6-acre piece that we are going to be purchasing. Because it's land court land, it's gonna add to the cost and the complexity of conducting the survey. Mark Ryan has given me a cost estimate of about $8,000 to have the land survey done. And we talked about possibly needing 2 plans, the land survey and then an approval not required plan to separate those 2 parcels, the bus lots, from the subject property. And that would be a plan that the planning board would need to approve as part of the transaction. The survey does not need to be completed prior to town meeting. And that was my big concern, that we need the survey before we go to town meeting. Town council said no, but we definitely need to have it all surveyed up before we close on it. And that, you know, I asked Mark Ryan to see if he could find a firm that could do that work and have the survey completed by the end of the year. We know a lot of these companies are busy while the economy's pretty hot right now. So that could be the kind of the determining factor of when we actually close. And so I wanted to try to have the goal of closing on the property by the end of the year. But we'll see how that goes. At a meeting with the town manager, Tony Mizuko, we had a discussion about purchasing the land. He had actually included the land purchase and money in the capital budget. Now we're going to be going in a different direction with using community preservation funding. And he wanted to make sure that we tried to reflect all of the costs of moving this forward, not just the land cost. And then, you know, later on we say, oh no, we need more money for this or that. And so we identified, we're budgeting $5,000 for legal or closing costs, $10,000 for a conservation restriction, $5,000 for the Department of Public Works to clean the property up. And based on my site walk on Monday, there's a lot of dead wood, there's trees down. I think we'll find stuff when we start digging around that's gonna need to go to the dump. So $5,000 for cleanup. I've included in the $8,000 estimate for the land survey. And at this point in time, the only unknown cost is the cost to have a landscape architectural firm do a preliminary design plan for the property. I contacted a firm that I've worked with in the past where I had developed a riverfront park, and they had designed a riverwalk trail. And the last time we retained them, we did that because they had experience doing riverfront parks on the Mystic River in Malden, and they had good experience with this. So I met with Pam Shadley from Shadley Associates on Monday, and she told me that they just finished up the Encore Boston project, and that they recently secured a contract to do the Polar Park in Worcester, the new ballpark that they're going to build. And she's involved with another riverfront park on the other side of the Mystic River right now. So Pam, we walked the site. I gave her like a conceptual design of a trail network, which basically would come down along Hawes Brook, turn where the confluence of Neponset and Hawes come together, make a left turn, and follow the Neponset River out to Elliott Park. There would be a smaller loop that would connect to St. John and
Joseph.
St. Joseph, so that people could have the option of doing a smaller loop or a larger loop, or walking all the way out to Elliott Park, and as I said, going up by the Bosch, over on Washington Street, and then back in. So it really provides a number of distances and options for people that, you know, for different, how much time you have to take a walk and people's ability. Pam said that she'll get me a cost estimate by Friday. And so I'll have my last number in the budget then, and that information will be used for the funding request for the warrant article. At this point, what we need the CPC to do is to make that decision of which accounts you want to tap the money from. As you are aware, the town's been in the process of transitioning from the AMC accounting system to the new Munis system. Apparently, the community preservation counts have yet to be put into the Munis system and the balances added in. Pat's has asked a few times for, what are our current balances in those accounts? And the most recent information that we have is from June, a printout and a trial balance that John had requested. And so we have that, but it may not be 100% accurate based on some bills that had been paid over the summer, particularly for the chapel project. What we have for records is, so there are two funds that would be in play here. We can't buy land with the Historic Preservation Fund. We can't, we have to use the open space account or the unrestricted account. Our most recent records indicate that we have a balance of $801,877 in the unreserved account and $32,751 in the open space account. And so at this point, I've given you the project background and updated you on my activity over the summer, working on this to get everything in place for a town meeting vote. And this is where the CPC needs to discuss and decide which accounts you want to draw the money from. The third option, as I mentioned earlier, is to bond it. And if you decide you want to go that route, we can talk to the treasurer, get an estimate on what the interest would be for a 5 or a 10-year bond. But given the $325,000 project budget, I feel that it's not enough money to bother to bond something. Just how we manage our money at home, if we have enough money in our pocket to pay something, we'd rather do that than take out the credit card and end up paying interest. So that's the decision that I'm going to leave you guys to decide on, and that decision will be reflected in the motion at town meeting, which will say, to raise or appropriate a transfer from the unrestricted and the open space X number of dollars.
I imagine several people will want to weigh in. I want to particularly hear from Cheryl because of the Concom connection.
Yeah.
And I want to hear from Joe, who has some thoughts on the bonding question. But first, and Helen,
We had other questions. Do they wait until after we discuss the bonding? Other questions about the presentation? Should they come before or after this discussion about the bonding?
really hadn't thought that far ahead, but we get, I wanted to ask a question about this sheet here. At the town meeting, when we gave our presentation on total available funds, I think we had just under 800,000 for the administrative plus the unreserved fund. And this looks like the two combined are like 835,000. Looks like
I gave him mine.
we got some more extra money.
You know more about it.
Is some of that the chapel?
Are you okay?
John?
If I may, yeah. Thank you. I don't want to jump ahead but this will cover most of my treasurer update. So we did ask for the trial balance June 30th, 2019. What this is. And we also asked for the detail behind the numbers. We can see a little further in. And I'm going to speak for Joe, but Joe was able to do a deep dive in it into the numbers as well, and we collaborated on some of the findings. So what we did was we put together some questions at the Tom McQuaid, and we're still waiting to hear back. It was about a week ago. We're still waiting to hear back on some of the answers, but it seems like the 800K may be low by 30 grand, and the 210 in historical, which actually does not impact this discussion, is actually high by 100,000. But again, we're waiting to hear from Tom McQuaid on some answers, and additionally, we have not heard an answer from, I don't mean to skip ahead, but Linda Clarkin over at the PBCC as far as the final closeout of the chapel. We have not heard from her, or sorry, a few days ago we heard from her saying that she's very close to getting us final numbers, but last I checked my email for this meeting, still no response. So,
The
as they say
purpose
in the
of-
newspaper, at the time of publication, there's still some open-ended questions, but as far as this discussion for the purchase, 800K and then 32,000 in open space are what we should be looking at.
That's exactly what I was hoping to land on, was that whatever changes are still to come, they will not materially affect our using these numbers for decision-making purposes here.
Yeah, well, again, what we're thinking is that the 800K is low by potentially 30 grand, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but, so if anything, we're benefiting there, because hopefully we get that 30K back. The other 100K is historic, that's a different situation that doesn't impact this decision.
And I do want to do Cheryl before we get to everybody else, because I want to know where Concom's current position is on this proposal.
We haven't had a meeting.
Have you got one scheduled?
We do have one scheduled, and we actually have it, because there's always an open slot where I get to speak, and on it is added for the conservation restriction on it, and Concom's very aware of putting restrictions on conservation land, and it had been discussed at prior meetings. So like I told Paul, I don't think that would be an issue at all. And the fact that we're getting close to being able to purchase this, most people know conservation's always happy to have more eggs in their basket, because we're all about land conservation and protecting the waterways and everything. So we think this, to be honest, is a big bonus, a really big bonus.
So you'd be comfortable with this committee making a decision based on the proposal before us?
Yeah, but we'll have it, yes, and we'll put it to a formal vote,
When
just
is
so,
that going to be?
next Wednesday. Yeah, and we'll make sure that Paul has a letter from the Conservation Board to go in the packet before it hits town meeting, which he'd probably have it right away once we take the vote.
I had one other question before, which is also a timing question. Paul, you said the Woodland Trails people are willing to come in and do a presentation. Are we thinking that would be a part of our meeting on the 25th?
Yes. I asked him if he was available, and he said he'd be willing to come on.
Excellent. Now, Alan?
Mr. Greeley next, you said?
No, he'll be on, but you're welcome.
Oh, thank you. So my questions were about the presentation. First, Mr. Halkiotis, in regard to the question of the selectmen not signing the agreement yet, there was a condition that they would sell it upon, for the seller, about the conditioned upon town meeting approval. We should have just put in a condition for the selectmen that it's a purchase conditioned upon town meeting approval. So we could have had a document signed by two parties.
Town council's in the driver's seat there. I'm not the lawyer, so I defer to him.
Okay, so then my next question was about bonding, and that bonding, I didn't know, when you made the presentation, I didn't know what extent that would be. So you were thinking about bonding for the purchase price? Is that what the question about bonding was about?
So that is an option for financing the purchase.
I agree with you, I don't think it's a good idea. And then you said that you needed two plans, one for the Saint Lot and one for the bus lot and Saint Lot. So do you think that since the bus lot is planned is for the benefit of the seller, do you think we should ask them if they want to help pay for the cost of the plan?
I initially asked them if they'd pay for the survey, and I didn't get a yes. I will go back and ask them again if they'd be willing to split the cost or share the cost with us.
They really should, because it's their plan and it's for their benefit.
It's for their property that they own, we're gonna be doing a
That's right.
survey of their properties. I'll revisit that, and.
They've been
the worst
very
that can happen
nice.
is they'll say no, but
Right, even if we could pick up $4,000 or $5,000, what the heck?
This is, my sense in meeting with the representatives from DCD Realty, that this is a little bit of a goodwill gesture. They,
Sure.
you know, they said, oh, the land's worth more, but well, but, you know, we'll sell it to the town. And I think they're new to the town, they purchased, the dealerships from Ernie Bach Jr., and they wanna do the right thing for the town, and I think they are.
And we appreciate their helping us out. They're being very, very good. My next question has to do, it's a land court plan and it's conservation terrain. We have riverfronts, I'd be surprised if we could get a land court plan for $8,000. I have a feeling it would cost more.
When I asked Mark Ryan
Okay.
yesterday for a cost estimate, he said $7,500. I threw 8,000 in as a contingency, but you may be right.
Survey or plan? I heard two words here, I heard.
No, we
plan.
need, in order to file a deed at the land court, the plan has to be drawn by a land court registered surveyor. You just can't have any surveyor submit a land court plan, because land court land is the highest quality title in the Commonwealth. And so I'd be surprised if you could get such a big plan for $8,000.
Ms.
Mark's
Doyle?
making some calls,
Yeah.
but we'll get back to him.
I know Norwood Engineering does it because he did Jim Shane's property at the end of Vanderbilt. All that is land court. And when we were doing stuff at the storage facility, we had to pull from one of his other properties. And Norwood Engineering came out, did all the surveying for us, and then I took everything over to the land court and registered the whole thing.
That was pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
That was good.
No, but I can find out. I know it wasn't.
But Matt, from his family, has been in the Norwood Engineering would be give the Norwood business our business. They do so much for the town. And Matt's on the board at the Norwood Cooperative Bank, and
Yeah.
they've given us thousands of dollars for everything. And they're familiar with Norwood,
Oh, yeah.
and they might give us a break. So I'd ask them first.
Okay.
Can I do a follow-up? They might also have a lot of that information
Right.
already in their system, because
Right.
there's a lot of times I'll call up and say, hey, Matt, can you print me out? Because I already know a lot of the stuff's already been surveyed.
Control points and things like that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
if-
true.
I'll
That's
follow up.
really true.
If I could add to this, the warrant has a total of 325,000. The itemized things below it total 308,000.
Oh,
So there's $17,000 to cover what the preliminary park design turns out to be, and things like what you've been talking about. And I'm guessing that should be enough for both, although it sounded like the preliminary park design was not as well understood in terms of its cost implications.
At this point, I'll wait till Friday to find out what her estimate is, and if the motion needs to request more than 325, it will. I don't have a contingency number in here either, so it's still a little bit fluid, but I wanted to give the CPC as much information that we know today for your decision-making process.
I have one more question, end of my questions. So in regard to the landscape plan, so down deep in my heart, I would rather than have, at this point, rather than pay someone to do a landscape plan, we have an excellent trails committee. We have Boy Scouts, we have Girl Scouts, and we have a conservation commission. We want to hear from the people, what the people want. We might want a ramp for kayak, we might want a ramp for canoes, we might want the Norwood Fishing Game Club, the Fishing Game Club, the Sportsman's Club. I'd rather have it a Norwood plan than a Boston plan or any other plan. I'd like the input of the townspeople.
The process will include a public input, we'll have a meeting of the stakeholders and get their input. What I was hoping is when it comes time for getting the permits and doing the actual construction, that's where hopefully we could do some of that work in-house. I can apply for the notice of intent and the river protection application. Unfortunately, I think this is gonna get more complicated with an Army Corps of Engineers 404 permit application. This will get more complicated than you can imagine, but the price, the cost estimate that we'll get from Shadley Associates will be a line item cost estimate. So if there's something that we don't wanna do, or we don't think we need it, you know, we negotiate that out at the time of doing a contract. So that will put us in the driver's seat to pick and choose just what exactly we want to do. I think it makes sense to get a professionally done plan and then see what we can do on our end to build out that, you know, build the trails and stuff.
We have to get, in what we want to do on the conservation, that regulations that you're gonna get, we have to have everything included in that before we submit it, right? We don't want to leave anything out. We want to include what the Fishing Game Club wants, what the Sportsman's Club, what the trails want. All that has to be included.
And we talked about it, and she said, you know, we'll include a line item for a public input meeting, get input on the design, the final design.
We have to protect the neighborhood about parking lots and entrances and exits.
Okay, let me get some other people into the, Ms. Doyle and then Mr. McFarland.
Okay, just to follow up from Helen to Paul. Paul's correct. You actually need somebody professional to do it. And the reason being is, you're dealing with two different water bodies there. And because there's so many guidelines and restrictions dealing with the riverfront, if you have a professional come in, they're already going to know what all the do not disturb, do not do this, do not do that, because you're going to have it all documented at some point on a set of plans in order to submit it, one, to Concom and to get it through DEP and all the other hurdles. So it's not like we could just go, okay, we want this, this, and this. It won't go anywhere. It'll be dead in the water because the water bodies are so protected. So Paul is actually correct, and having a professional help us with this in order to get through all those hurdles. If it was just regular conservation land that didn't have all the water bodies on it, yeah, you could, it's a totally different ballgame. But when you're talking water bodies, all of a sudden the stakes are much higher.
Peter?
I'm pretty set here. I'd like to make a motion that the Community Preservation Committee purchase this property known as the Saints Lots for $325,000 using the unreserved account as the sole source of funding at this time.
Could you please amend that, purchase it for $280, and then if the purchase price is $280,
Well,
you have to have the purchase price is $280. So maybe you could add some other language about,
I think Peter's motion is better aligned with the way this proposal is written.
well,
And
it
we
should
can-
include a purchase of $280,000.
I don't even know if you need that.
I don't
know.
Let's try it with your version and see how the discussion goes. Do I have a second for
Second.
that? Okay. Now, did you have anything else you wanted to say besides putting the motion?
No, I mean, as presented by Paul tonight. And,
Then-
could I please hear the motion again?
Yes.
motion that the CPC purchase purchase and fund this project for $325,000 using the unreserved account as the source of revenue.
Okay, now, Joe, you had some things.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I am in favor of this, but some of the questions and comments are more operational and borderline mechanical than specific to this project, and there might not be in any specific order. I do agree with the fact that the professional plan is absolutely required for this. There is really nobody either on staff or in town that could do this unofficially. So this is not, a professional plan is definitely something we wanna put into place, and we should do it at the same time. Whatever we spend, whatever the number is that plan arrives at, that's definitely down the road or down the path. But I would say we should do the plan, and we should do it as part of this project. My question, and I'm glad to hear that there are questions relative to the project and not just the funding of it, because not only is it our job as the CPC to determine where the money is coming from and how the money should be structured, but it's also our job to approve the project and present it. So it's not, so we're not gonna skip that first step of reviewing the project and the quality of the project. There is at least one, relative to the property, there's at least one easement, the MWRA. So do we know anything about that yet?
As a condition of approval for the open lot storage, I wanted to cover both contingencies of if we buy the property or if we don't buy the property. And since there was an MWRA easement and that ran to the town as well, as a condition of approval, we asked the applicant to give us easements, the sewer easement, and easements for the portions of the 3 cul-de-sacs and a section of connecting road that were on the private property. So the town has roads on their property, and so we wanted to make that right. They did satisfy that condition of approval by giving us those easements, and town council has those. If we buy the land, we're not gonna need them, so he's just holding on to them for now. As an interesting aside, there is a sewer pipe that's underground there, and there is an easement, and it leads to a concrete venting structure. And last week, Mark Ryan and I and Gary Shore and the water and sewer superintendent, Mr. Gerard, met with 3 representatives from the MWRA to talk about this venting structure, which has an unpleasant sewer odor. And we're gonna have hopefully a park-like piece of property that we want to invite the people to, and nobody really wants to smell that. And so we had an on-site meeting, and the MWRA had already gone out there. They built a wooden frame, 2x12, around the top of the foundation of this structure. They put a piece of filter fabric down and 4 inches of pine bark mulch. They said that they've had this in other towns, and this is the way they handled it, and it made the odor go away. It smelled like pine bark mulch. And so they were like, problem solved. And we asked them, I said, well, that's great. And they said, well, we need this, we need to get our trucks down to this, so this has to be open to us. You can't put anything on it that, we'll have heavy trucks coming back and forth. We do inspect this thing, at least once a month. He explained that underneath that, there's 2 18-inch sewer pipes, twins, that dive under the river, cross under the river, and pop back up on the opposite side. And there's another one of these structures. And that because of air pressure and the slope of the pipe, they have to have these venting things. He said they have them as part of the MWRA system, and this has been their solution to deal with this. So the problem is partially dealt with now, we think. We kind of have a wait and see and go out and sniff it once in a while. But I said to the guy from the MWRA, well, we're going to have a professional landscape architect doing a park design plan for us. We may want to come back to you and ask somehow to pretty this up, put some lattice around it or something. And I kind of left the door open. I asked if we could plant anything on it, and they said, no, we need to be able to pull this fabric back and access this, so we really can't have any bushes or trees or anything growing on top of it. I'm gonna go back to them and say, what about putting some lazy Susans or something? Can we put some flowers, some annuals on there, and then see what they say.
Yeah, I
And-
think you had some more points.
Yep, thank you. How about the Neponset River Watershed Association? Are they involved in all with the waterways? Do we need their authorization? They don't own it, but
They own a small parcel that's adjoining this, and it's under the Ponset River Corporation or something.
They
it's the
separated them.
dam.
It's a
Yeah.
separate corporation
Yep.
that's their landholding entity. They're aware of this, they support the project, and I want to say that I have a letter of support for them somewhere. And-
We do.
Yeah.
We do have.
And so they're definitely on board and, you know, would really like to see this land protected.
Okay. Just two more points. The information we've received so far, just to echo John's comment about the information that yellow, if you can just hold that sheet up there. Thank you. It's close, it's not accurate, but there are adequate funds to do this. We'll just have to get a little, we'll need confirmation from the town accountant's office as far as how much money we actually have before we can present that to town meeting. We need to know where we are to know where we're going. The way the open space, the balance on the open space account is small, so we're gonna definitely be dipping into the unrestricted account more than the open space or fund has available. And it's just as far as bonding is concerned, it's my own personal opinion that every time we have a project, regardless of the dollar amount, we should at least, it's part of our job to try to not only where the money is coming from, but also to give it, even if it's just a cursory look of, if we were to bond, what would it mean? Because I absolutely think that we will get to that point of needing to bond projects. We're just not there yet, and this isn't the one to start with. But if we did, I just did some quick math. If we were to bond this for 10 years, it would add about $60,000 to the project cost, and the payments, the combined payments per year would only be about $35,000 to $40,000 a year. So it would cut the, again, if we were to run into like a larger dollar project, that we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, because we do want to have available funds for other projects. But so this would add, a pretty nominal amount, like $60,000 over 10 years and $30,000 over 5 years roughly. So that's just some real quick math. So it's I think we should do this every time we have a project or a basket of projects, but for this project, some quick math says that it doesn't make sense to do this.
I like to think in terms of not only dollars, but percents, and 60,000 would be about 20% on top of what we have. So it's, by itself, that would be about as much as we've allocated for some of the other whole projects that we've approved. I will come back to you, Helen, in just a second. I wanted to throw something out on the subject of what the accounts are, because Peter included that in his motion. Joe has observed that, given the very small balance that there is currently in the open space account, we know most of it's gonna come out of the unrestricted, and Peter's motion would have all of it coming out of the unrestricted. I'm sort of between those two positions myself. I think when you have a project, there is an important message set by having at least some of the money coming out of the account that is designated for the area it's serving. It could be $15,000, $10,000, which would still be a third to a half of the balance in the open space account. And I don't know if it's worth doing that just for symbolism, but I think we should have some discussion about the allocation that Peter's proposing, to see if there's anybody who would prefer a different arrangement than the one that's in the motion. And Helen, you were up.
Thank you. My question was about the easement. The easement exists on the land court plan, correct?
I think so.
So that means that the easement runs with the land.
Yep.
So We have to just live with them.
Yep, yeah, we can, that's there, and we need to keep that flowing and not cause any obstructions. I think that the reason why we wanted the town to have access to that as well. It was, so considering it's private property, the MWRA has their easement, but in the event that our water sewer department needs to access that, we wanted rights to be able to get there, and so I think that was the reasoning behind that.
And I think that you handled that finely in the best way that you could.
Thanks,
Thank you very much for all you've done.
thank you.
Just a second. I want to go back before we move too far past it to one of Helen's earlier points, which was who does the lead on putting the plan together, the park plan together. We've had a couple people speak rather eloquently about how the physical nature of this property demands a professional approach to the plan to make sure that the considerable laws and regulations are fully observed. But there is also merit to the idea of having some significant input from various local parties. So my thought on that is, by calling it a preliminary plan, you've left space for it to be modified, and that's probably the best way to use the local input, is as input for tweaking of the plan that the professionals come up with. So I think we can really do all of these things. But the other point I want to make for the long run is, I think we may want to automatically check in with the Trails Committee whenever we're getting land that we imagine will be used in a park setting. So we would know at least whether the ideas that are being floated by the proposer are well aligned or not well aligned with the emerging plan that the Trails Committee is developing. It's too late to try to do that here in any formal sense, but we have Joe here, and if he saw anything that looked wildly off the reservation, I'm sure he would have said so. Paul?
We have a site walk scheduled for Monday with the chairman and I, so we're initiating that. I want to try to explain the point that you made about a preliminary plan versus like a final plan, to give an example so everyone will understand. The preliminary plan will take a plan of the property, and it'll have a dashed line of where potential trails would run and what the distance of those trails are, and then a cost estimate for X number of cubic yards of stone dust to create this trail. If the trail is to keep the stone dust in place on the trail, there might be a wooden border, or timber borders, or the steel edge, and the preliminary plan will just show like the location and a ballpark cost estimate for a stone dust trail system. The final plan will have a cross section, the depth of the stone dust, the spec'd out actual material to create the edges of the trail, and that kind of thing. So in your mind, you know, preliminary just shows in a schematic way what we're thinking of doing. Over here we might put a viewing platform, but then after, if we buy the property, after the preliminary plan is done, we're gonna need to go back to town meeting for round 2 and get the construction funding to build this.
Understood.
And I want to make sure everyone, you know, we're not surprised next year, well, we thought this was all it was going to be. And I'll have to explain that at town meeting so town meeting members understand this is phase 1, and we're going to come back for the detailed plans and construction costs for funding at a subsequent year.
I think that your application form was very direct and explicit about the fact that this is likely to be the first of several projects involving the property. Patty?
I was just gonna comment on what you mentioned earlier about the funding. I agree with Peter to take it all out of the unreserved fund for now, because I see further down the road, when we decide exactly what it is, we have community input as to what the folks really want. I see that being more appropriate to come out of the reserved open space fund then.
Okay. Anyone else
Excellent.
want to weigh in specifically on the funding arrangement?
I just wanted to remind the committee that way back when we started, that when we were like taking money, like for the historic part, we said we never ever wanted to run a basket all the way down. We
Right.
wanted to leave a buffer in the basket, and I think the way that Peter proposed this, it left the buffer.
When I was doing a little research, I looked at what we had done for the other big project, which was the Carillon. And in that one, we took half the money out of what was then the historic preservation, which amounted to about a third of the cost of the project, and the rest of it out of unrestricted. But that left them with a lot of more money than you could get if you took $1 out of current open space. So I think the reasoning, the logic, the models people are using are all converging on the same answer.
I have one comment on the motion, and I like the motion. My only concern is because I don't know what the preliminary design plan is gonna cost. There's one X factor in the budget. In the event that it would add up to more than $325,000, how is that gonna be handled, given the motion?
Tony's got them.
Isn't there a buffer built in? Didn't we say there was a buffer of 12,000?
Might not be enough.
17.
The
Well,
The
there's a
buffer may
Might not be enough.
We have had the question before, if not in this committee, in other committees, where you put in a cap. You know, you're funded up to this amount, not to exceed kind of thing. I don't know if that's appropriate here.
Just on my thoughts on it was, I kind of, I think I stated it once, I don't know if I repeated it when I said it, but as presented by Paul tonight. So if it has to be amended, we still have to take another vote when we, so we might have to take a vote like on October,
Schedule a meeting, we'll probably have to
Probably- we
schedule
probably should
a
put
meeting October
ourselves
7th.
in the condition that we have a meeting like at 6:30 on October 7th at town meeting or something, just prior to town meeting to take a vote in case we have to.
Maybe we could reword it so that it doesn't have that particular amount in it.
Town meeting's kind of one of the month though.
No,
They
but,
have-
but
yeah.
at this point, we could, and then we could come up with the final number when we know it.
Well, then I just strike the
Right.
325,000,
Right.
but but
You could just wait until the next meeting on the 25th when we know what that number is.
Well, I'd rather get a vote tonight, right?
Would I?
Yeah, let's get a vote tonight. How could we do that, Mr. Hall? You're good at words.
Joe was waving his hand.
I would agree that the 30,000, whatever the balance in the open space account, and it's so small that if we cut it in half, it would be more of a message than financially impactful. So I think we might as well just, in my own opinion, I'd say take it all out of unrestricted.
Right.
But the caution is that, this is if you look at the balance in that account, there's only $800,000. So we're basically gonna take 35 to 40% out of it for this one specific project. We take in about roughly 70, next year we'll have about $725,000 in new revenue for FY '21. Right, so if you think of this, it's almost a half year's worth of money, plus the match, yeah. So it's a big chunk given, we're still basically starting out here. But in spite of that, we knew this was coming. It's a worthwhile project. And, I say take it all out of unrestricted. That's my own opinion.
Let me suggest the most reasonable and still formal-looking approach that I've heard is we act on Peter's motion. If we have to change the number, we have a meeting in advance of the meeting at the special town meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
so
sure.
we could post 2 meetings then on 25th and then October 7th, just as
And we use it if we need it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, I like that.
We could be able to have the final numbers by the 25th, no? So we could
Well,
just-
I mean,
We could just do it then, which would be
take,
good.
Well, that.
Just posting it doesn't mean that we
Posting it
have to
would
have
cover
it.
that.
Sure.
If
I
you
move
have
the
it by
question.
25th, then we can have a motion then. If you don't,
I move the motion.
well, you have to be recognized. No,
No, you don't. Not to move a motion, do you?
Yes, you do.
To do anything. And so I want to make sure everybody's had a chance to weigh in on all of this as they see fit. And I think, Tony, you're the only one who hasn't spoken. Do you have anything you want to throw in?
I think based on the amount of money that we could probably handle having the entire amount coming out of there, I still really don't understand why we, as a municipality, that we can't know how much money is, I don't care which system it's on, why we can't know. what's
Preaching
it-
to the choir.
Yes.
to the choir. So that's still a surprise to me, but with the information we have, I think it's fine. I'd like to see it get done, and I'm really happy for the town that this is happening. I'm still a little bit more stuck on the easements, quite frankly, because that was one page on 19 that spoke about the easements and that they bisected, I think that's the word they used, bisect the property, or dissect, which one?
It would be bisect.
Bisect the site,
Dissect would be for the autopsy.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
We'll talk to
Bisect
you
the
later
site.
about that, yeah.
And, one of the easements is not recorded, so when all of this is said and done, will that other easement get recorded?
No. I have the answer to that.
And then I go, why? And my other concern is that, I hadn't heard about the Otis story until tonight. And do we know that this easement is actually in good condition? When, physically speaking, is it, if it's a pipe, is there a pipe under there? So I know that there are ways to look in the pipe with the videos and all that, so, and I'm just concerned on us, on our end, for a piece of conservation land, that an unpleasant odor is not too conducive to the enjoyment of the property, and so what if it gets worse? And I also wanna know, what is the odor of gas? Is it a methane? Is it garbage? So, I just wanna say, I don't think that's okay, and I'm concerned about it, and is that the one that's not recorded, and is that because they don't want anybody? I don't know, I just have a little reservation about that I wanna express out
Do you
loud.
want to chime in and then Helen?
It's my understanding this has been in place since the 60s. The water and sewer superintendent, Joe Girard, had told me that they do check on this like once a week, and I think the MWRA checks on it like once a month. I don't know whether they've TV'd, whether they've, when the last time they looked at the sewer line was. So, not my department, but when I've got the town department and the MWRA both aware of this and saying that they monitor it, I assume that it's okay.
I mean, is there anything written about the times when they check it? Is there a documentation tape, on readouts or anything? Is anybody reading it?
I don't know, that's not my
I guess I would
department.
like to say that we should do due diligence on that before we own anything that has part of this on it.
It's a question that we could ask the DPW director or the water and sewer.
I mean, I don't know how the rest of the members feel, but we're gonna buy and use a big hunk of cash and,
Helen, do you have some thoughts?
In regard, it's a different easement that was unrecorded. The MWRA easement is recorded and it is in effect, and we have to live with it. There's nothing that can be done about that. It's just a condition of the property that contributed to the value of the property, or the lesser of the value of the property. The unrecorded easement had to do with a different subject, and it was brought to the land court to be recorded, but land court would not accept it because that plan was inaccurate. It was not done properly, so land court threw it out. So don't worry about that old unrecorded easement. Doesn't apply.
Joe?
Sorry, just on the cap, not to put you at ease or at ease on it, but the cap itself, you have to be. I guess I've trespassed on the property quite a bit. It's not quite in my backyard, but it's in somebody else's backyard, I know. The cap itself is, you can't smell it unless you're maybe 10 feet. You have to be very close to where this structure, it's probably about the size of this table and maybe that high. You have to be very close to it to smell anything. And that was even before this remediation, this recent.
Not with a nose like this, half a mile away.
Okay. But it's about 50, it's, I guess is maybe, I'm terrible with distance, but it's about 50 feet from the water.
Closer.
So it's on the far, like it's well away from the houses at the end of the St. Streets. And it's
That's why it goes-
close to the water, but it's I would think it'd be in a position that any trail or any activity could be structured in such a way to circumnavigate and you wouldn't even know it was there. So. And there's only one cap. It's not, structures throughout. There's just one area where this resides.
Does heat, drain, or drought affect its odor?
Hmm?
Does heat, drain, or drought affect its odor? Does it
Oh,
matter?
I don't know. It wouldn't be a bad idea if the CPC wanted to do a little site walk and see what we're gonna recommend buying. And Patrick and I would be glad to schedule a time where we could take a little walk on the property, and that way
Would be open to the public
you
too,
could
maybe?
see and smell for yourself and get a feeling for what the land's like.
How would that work in terms of the schedule? Are you saying we postpone the vote until after that site visit?
Just saying that I think you should all be acquainted with the property that we're gonna recommend acquisition of.
I agree
Cheryl.
with that.
Tony, I think you have to look at the sewer part of it. It's like your plumbing in your house, like up underneath your any of your sinks and everything, you have P-traps. But in your house, anywhere you have a sink or drain or anything, you have a vent pipe that's venting everything up and out. The difference is this is a low one that's venting, but it has to vent the gases so they don't all build up. But all houses, no matter where your sink is, your shower, your toilet, there's a vent pipe.
The stink pipe.
Yep.
Right.
And the difference is yours is going way up and out, where this is low lying.
Okay, I think we've had a chance to kick around everything, and I like the idea of scheduling a visit where those of the committee who are available and interested can learn for themselves what the conditions are like.
Go take a
But
look.
I would like now to ask how many are in favor of Peter's motion. That is everybody, so that has passed unanimously. We have about 2 minutes left for more than 2 minutes worth of work here, but it won't be much more than 2 minutes. John, your treasurer update, I believe, is on next.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered it. We're still waiting for answers from the town of McQuaid. Hopefully we get those shortly. Also looking for the final closeout statement by Linda Clarkin over at the PVCC. I don't know, Joe, if you've gotten any emails, maybe except we reply also, we reply to you with response, any update?
May I? I haven't gotten an email, but just to be clear, Linda Clarkin is the secretary for the PVCC, so she's not the gatekeeper in any way. She's kind of stuck in between here. The PVCC actually authorized additional money for an accounting of the chapel project, and they don't have it yet. And they opened the building and put up a plaque 3 months ago, and they still don't know how much they spent on the project. It's still in the works. So, just sorry. So I don't know anything more than you know.
Paul,
So we're hoping for by the 25th, we have final numbers for the public hearing.
understood. Paul?
With respect to the chapel project and closing it out and the remaining invoices. As I mentioned earlier, the town is transitioning to this new munis accounting system. And every invoice has to be signed off by, in most cases, a department head. I was asked to sign off on an invoice for the chapel a couple of weeks ago. And I explained that I really didn't have a lot of involvement with the project. I'm not the project manager. But that I didn't want to cause the contractor to be delayed in getting paid. And I had some discussions with Mr. McQuaid about this and with Linda Carkin, and I said, you know, I'll sign off on it and approve this invoice, but I'm a little uncomfortable. I want to go back and explain this to the Community Preservation Committee. Yesterday, I was told that there were 3 other invoices that needed to be taken care of. I had talked to Linda Carkin after I signed the first one, and I said, is this it? Is there any more? And she said, well, there was a mistake on the name on the plaque, and that's gonna get corrected, and I'm expecting another, probably one final invoice. And then I got a visit from Mr. McQuaid yesterday, and he said, you know, there are 3 more invoices, why aren't you signing off on them? And I said, I wasn't aware that they were there for me to sign off. And then I had another discussion with him about, I'll sign off on them. I'm a little uncomfortable because it's not my project. The CPC hasn't, you know, we haven't really talked about this. They don't want a board or a committee person logging onto the Munis system and handling this stuff. They want a staff, someone from the town, an employee. And so I did sign off on 3 more invoices yesterday. What I had planned to do is to get copies of those invoices. I talked to Pat about this today, and I'm gonna put together a memo to the PVCC and the CPC, attach the invoices, and just explain to everyone what I just told you, so that everyone's aware of what's going on. I know that everyone wants to close out the project. I didn't want our contractors at the end of the job to get strung along on their last invoices, and I wanted to move it forward. But I wanted to explain to everyone, I was a little uncomfortable doing it, and I'll provide you with all the backup detail of the final amounts that I signed off on, and we'll verify if that is the final end of the project invoicing.
Question please, how much do they equal up to?
That's what I need to,
Ballpark, just ballpark.
I don't want to. I should have wrote it down before I pushed the button and okayed it, and I didn't.
Another question please, how does the permanent building committee fit into this? Shouldn't that be their responsibility?
Well, this is the thing, this project has been their project, and they had been signing off on invoices, I assume, all through the project. Now with Munis, they want a department head, the responsible person, and because
You're a
community
responsible
preservation
person.
is kind of under community development department, it landed in my lap.
Oh, you got.
You should have sent it right back to the community, to the permanent building committee, and told them, shall we approve this?
They don't know, I don't think they know what's going on, so I will backtrack and provide it so everyone has this information. I wanted to just be perfectly honest, I told everyone involved that I wasn't really comfortable, but I understand that these invoices are outstanding and need to be paid, and I will provide you all with the documentation of what amounts and what accounts it was withdrawn from. And in the future, we need to figure out how I would be more comfortable if we discuss this further and arrive at the conclusion that, yeah, okay, Paul, we're gonna let you sign off on all of these things, or else we'll have to come up with some other plan.
I was under the very vivid impression that the discussions of almost a year ago had made it clear that we wanted to have invoices signed off on by both PBCC and us if we were in fact having our money used. And that they were to make sure to spend the town money first
Yes.
and our money last. Clearly, none of this is soaked in. And
I had the same recollection too.
yeah, and so I'm not sure it matters much if we change our own internal protocol, if the other part of the way it's supposed to work is never going to be fixed. But I want to be sure about a couple of things. When the invoices stop flowing, I want the account on the town side to read 0.
From the town meeting appropriation.
Right.
Yes. because I assume that ours will not read 400,000. And I don't want it to be less than zero. Everything else is in the hands of other people, I'm afraid. I don't know, and we've sent our best into the fray repeatedly over the past year. And, you know, we are where we are right now. Helen?
Thank you. Move that we require that the permanent building committee sign the invoices prior to Mr. Calchiotis being responsible for signing them.
Well, if that applies to this project, it may be moot. If it applies to future projects, we probably want to think about that a bit more. So.
In the event this is not moot, apparently it isn't moot.
Can I second that just for discussion purposes, so can we have a discussion on that?
Thank you.
For future projects, you mean?
No, I'll second the motion just so we can talk about the motion.
John?
I think it was last meeting, Patrick volunteered to process all the.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
So I mean that's the issue with how the chapel project kind of turned out, is that it was a town meeting appropriated project at first, and then CPA funds supplemented that project for additional funding. And so although we tried to Joe can probably speak to this most of all, try to make sure that when we got to the CPA funds, that all invoices using that funding would be, the CPA would be CPC would be notified, and that we would be kind of an equal agreement with the PBCC. There was issue with communication. There was an issue with how the money was put into the proper accounts, and it took pretty much a year to get that resolved, which was a little bit, just an issue. I think going forward, though, the fact that we have this will actually be a lot more beneficial going forward with the current projects. So the problem last one is I want to get a project expense account set up, and so we have those now for our four current projects. So there's no juggling of the funds. It's I have a project. Here's the money from whether it's unreserved, whether it's a specific use of open space. Put into that account, has a name. I know what it is. I know when an invoice comes in. When an applicant has an invoice for their project, when eventually they go through the procurement process, get the get the contract, everything like that. Those first invoices, the only one who's going to have authority to pay that is us, because it's using CPA funds. So when I go to the unit system and I click which department those funds are coming out of, no one else can do that except us. We have me, Paul, and Ramonda are the only people within the community development department that have access to community development funds, and the CPA fund accounts are kind of joined with that. I think me and you, Paul, are the only ones, I think Ramonda's included. But basically, the account for CPA funds, you make a payment out of those, only we can do that. So going forward, there's not going to be the same issues with the chapel project. There's going to be a little bit more clarity, because you're not going to be able to make a payment unless I see it first, and then obviously I go through the process of doing a requisition, a purchase order, but at the same time, I'm saving those invoices, I'm getting the detail of what the money needs to be spent for, and I'm reporting it back to you guys. It shouldn't have been done from the get-go. So
Patrick is essentially going to be the gatekeeper, which we didn't have
Right.
with the chapel.
And as you've said very well, what's driven us crazy has been the unique circumstances of having two sources of funding. We set down the conditions that we were to be used last, and everyone else with their hand on the money had an incentive to do it exactly the opposite way. We aren't going to find ourselves in that position ever again, which is why I think the motion is moot for now.
But to the last point there, this will come up again, not this mess, but the fact that we have joined funds, that whether it's grant money or from some other department or capital or whatever, we will run into this again. So we just have to, as Pat said, now that we've got these accounts set up in Munis, it'll come up again, and we'll just have to face this again, that, because you can guarantee that whether it's housing money, you know, let's say there's a housing project and we're dealing with some other regional entity or some federal grant money maybe or something like that, this will co-joining of funds for the purpose of project, funding will come up again. We just have to get our arms around it. This whole thing with the PBCC has been nothing short of a nightmare since the beginning.
But I don't think that the problem was ever that we lacked motions and clear rules here that should have made all of this never happen. And that's what makes me concerned, that if we passed a motion now, who's going to enforce it?
It is a learning experience, and I would agree that it's probably close to, if not a moot point.
Pat and then Helen.
I think that's, as I'm starting to, learn and pick up, I think what's kind of one of the benefits, especially of having the Munis system, is that anything that's going to use money from our accounts, there's a system of checks and balances in place. Whereas at the old system, there was a little bit more, I guess, leeway in terms of finding out information. I don't know how to word that. But basically, as Paul, just stated earlier, something that would, so the current invoices for the chapel project, it's obviously taking from CPA funds. And because it's taking from a CPA fund, Paul is the department head that basically that falls under. So, we find out about stuff like that because there has to be an approval from the department head before it goes to purchasing, before it goes to the accounting fund. I think in the future, when we have projects that have multiple funding sources, we already have that pretty much agreement stated that all CPA appropriated funds, those are the funding sources that are used the last. So we have projects that are all, obviously the current ones are all CPA funded, so that's not really an issue. But say we have a project where we're working with trustees of the reservation, and maybe there's an additional grant funding, and then there's CPA funds. I think the same thing. When those invoices come in, I would be a person that decides, I guess, which account that money is going towards first. So if you're going 1, 2, 3 of 3 different accounts of 3 different funding sources, I'm going to be the person that enters that in. So once one is depleted, we move on to the next one, and then eventually, when a project gets to needing CPA funds, that will be the last funding source that I would enter an invoice for. So I think because of how it is now, I think there's going to be a lot more, just a lot more control, or a lot more kind of visibility of what's going on, which is going to be great.
Thank you. My question is more basic. My question is, when an invoice comes in, do you have the approval from the person that's submitting? Like in this case, it was the Permanent Building Committee. Did you have them say, okay, please pay this?
No.
That's what we should have had.
And I don't know if Linda Clarkin had that conversation with them, and it could have happened. They could have okayed it. I just don't know. I got a computer screen, and I have access to information about the invoice, but not actually seeing the invoice. And when I saw it, the only thing the only clue I had that this was something that involved a project that, this particular project, was I saw Spillane was the name of the contractor, and I said, those are the guys that did the chapel. Other than that, I didn't really have many clues that cued me in that this is what it was all about.
Cheryl?
Just curiosity. How do you know it's a true invoice then?
Right.
That it was legitimately generated from a project?
Right.
So
That is so dumbfounded to me.
When the invoices come in, and again, we're all new with Munis, when the invoices come in, information on the invoice, like the invoice number, the amount, the name of the contractor, the address, phone number, that's keyed into a requisition to a requisition. And what I was asked to sign off on was that requisition. The actual invoices can be scanned and attached to the requisition, so if you push a button, you can see that. I don't know how to do that, I didn't do that, I don't know if it was available for me to look at. And honestly, I felt, a little pressured of, hey, Paul, there's these 3 invoices, why don't you sign off on them? And nobody told me that they were there for me to sign off. And Mr. McQuaid was saying, well, we gotta move this along. So, this hopefully isn't gonna happen in the future, and we're gonna work through all of this. And I will backtrack and get the physical invoices, I'll write a memo, we'll account for each one that was signed off, and attach the invoices. PVCC and CPC will all have that information, and this just happened yesterday, so we will put that together for you and have it to you by the next meeting.
Very good. So we have a motion on the floor. Is there any more discussion? Any motions to table?
What motion do we have on the floor?
Your motion.
My motion, was that seconded? Oh, for
Yes.
discussion
Discussion,
purposes?
yep.
I can withdraw that motion.
Okay,
I'll withdraw my second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah, it's,
Rolling.
they're ending the way they began.
Yeah,
And that's sad, there's no learning.
consistent.
Listen, I know we're running late here. The last item of business we have is the plan for our September 25 meeting, where we'll need people to lead the presentation on the Saint Street lot, and people to lead the presentation and the dialogue on the community preservation plan. And now, it seemed to me, Paul, that you plus the representatives from Wildlands Trust would be the logical people, same as the proponents and managers of the other projects led their presentations, and just leave it entirely in your hands. We have had a meeting to get public input on the community preservation plan, and I think we could do it pretty much the same way. We have passed around index cards for each of the 4 areas after having shown people what we've already got and such. I think, Peter, you and I are the logical ones to take lead on that. I don't know if we've got any, I was trying to, while we were talking about other things, trying to find if we had a slideshow for the first one. And the slideshow we seem to have is a generic slideshow about how CPA works.
Yeah.
I don't think we have one that has any more granular detail from out of the plan. So, what's the spirit of the group?
The only thing I think we need to show, and we just need to show this I've said this before, it's just the grid. As far as, the verbs, it's about the verbs, where, how to create, create, preserve, restore.
What about turning the goals lists in each of the areas into a slide, slides?
So have 4 slides plus the.
Well, it'll probably run to more than 1 per, but yeah, basically 4.
Yeah, well, 4 areas, 4 subjects.
Have the grid, any other front and back that we need, and I can put that together.
Yeah, I just
Or you could
basically
put that
saying
together.
5, well, I don't do PowerPoint, never done
Okay,
PowerPoint.
well then I'll do it.
But I would say 5 slides and maybe an intro slide.
And, yeah, and after each slide, circulate the cards and let people give their input on that.
Yeah, this is what we have for goals right now. Do anybody have anything else they want to add to it?
Yeah,
And then just let them
Exactly.
go with that. And then we just start out with the grid saying, this is what we can do and what we can't do, and this is what you need to think about.
now, we're probably gonna have a more mixed audience because we're doing 2 very different things at this meeting, and there may be some who are only there to hear about Saint Street.
I would say that's probably 75%.
Well, what I'm gonna suggest is that we do that part first.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And so that we don't have people who don't wanna be there,
Rustling the papers.
being asked to fill out cards.
They're friendly people.
Oh, they will be, but they'll just be anxious.
Yes, but
We don't want friendly, anxious people.
it was actually pretty well attended last year. It was like 25 people,
Yeah,
I
we,
think.
yeah.
There was a, to that, if I could, to
Please.
that point, there were several people who were watching and learning, and those people we'll probably hear from in this next round.
Oh, I see.
People didn't want to go first, or they weren't ready to go first, but they wanted to understand and absorb the process so that
Makes sense.
their turn would come soon.
I'm sure my wife will be there.
Can I-
Peter?
I just have a question. What time are we starting? Is it 7?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And
Okay,
we're at
then-
the Willet.
Then I've been working off bad information.
At the Willet?
Can I,
The Willet, right?
the Willett School, the Willett,
Willow room of the Civic Center.
Oh,
Civic Center, second floor.
okay, Civic?
Did I just see it in this
Yeah,
paper?
that's what we had last year.
can I make?
That's a good note to end on. I will come back.
Motion to adjourn then?
Second.
Joe and I were on the Tom Cummings show a couple days ago, and I thought it went well. And we basically said any question you've got to Pat. And that includes the where and the when and the what time for our meetings. Now, I think if we, from what Tom was saying, if we send over information on the time and the date and everything, and ask them to put that into one of their little strips.
I believe I already have. Be there with my dog.
But you could play dumb and say, John and Joe are taking you up on your offer, because he offered several times. If we have anything to say, he wants to have first crack at it. Say, we want to make sure that we get maximum coverage on the meeting, and make sure that you remember that it's 2 parts. So there's, might be a couple of batters. One is the where and the when, and the other is the what. I'll leave that to you, Pat.
Yeah, sure.
Joe?
2 more quick ones. Can I recommend that at the public hearing, we throw that slide up as well? How is the money sliced and diced?
Yes.
If we can. And the second thing, I'll volunteer to help John. One thing we absolutely cannot do, in my own humble opinion, is get up in front of town meeting on October 7th and tell them we don't know how much money we have. This
Oh,
is,
God, no.
this is ridiculous. The
Yeah.
fact,
Well, that's
it
how I
doesn't,
feel.
I know the pain of the Munis implementation, but for us to come into September and we still don't know how much money we have is,
It's
we
not very
can't,
transparent.
we can't stand up in front of town meeting that night and not know. So,
But we will never use those words.
right,
But
We'll
we
give a
may
number.
be in a position, despite our best efforts, of saying, this is what the Munis accounts show for us at the time. We think they're almost final and almost exactly right, and those are what we use in preparing these proposals for you. We don't have the usual motions regarding approving our revenue and everything, so it may not even come up. It may be that the motions that we're going to have are, here's this project, please approve this project, full stop.
but somebody's gonna ask the
Somebody's
question.
gonna ask, and
It's better to
Well,
be,
since we're the last article, they might not want to.
it's better to be prepared and not need it than,
They asked last year. They wanted to know what we had
yeah,
for
it's
money.
better to be prepared
Yeah.
than soon.
Oh, I know, that
Yeah.
we will
I
be.
think it's a
Yeah.
logical question.
I just don't understand. We're so.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn,
Second.
and all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.